The first thing we said about Reuven is he says Reuven should have been the eldest. Should have been, well, he is the oldest. He should have been, because he's the oldest, he should have had Yecher Seit. He should have additional strength and additional power, understood to mean the rights of the firstborn, maybe priesthood, maybe kingship. But he says, Pachas Kamaim, you rushed like water. And rushing is a wonderful quality, but not for a leader, right? A leader has to be calculated. And just responding to emotion, sometimes you need it, sometimes it's necessary, but not necessarily for leadership. That's how we understand what he says about Reuven. Therefore, he says, Al Totar, you will not get more. You're not going to get more than everybody else. And people see that as a rebuke, but commentaries that we read last time insist that it's not that he's not being blessed. He says you're being blessed, you're just not getting more than the brothers. So you don't have to read it as a negative. It's just explaining why he's not becoming the leader and not getting the additional blessing, but he is on par with everybody else. So we can already explain how Reuven is also a blessing. Because again, when I was in grade school, they told us, well, Reuven is, and the first two are being cursed. Well, it's not so simple, right? The first one, according to these commentaries, he's saying you're not going to get additional blessing, but it's still going to be blessed, because part of this is at the end of the blessings of Jacob, it says that he basically says that he blessed all of them, right? He says, verse 28 on page 283, he says, all these are the tribes of Israel, 12, and this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them. He blessed each according to his appropriate blessing. In other words, there's no mention of the rebuke, and it sounds like the blessing goes to everybody. So in that sense, it's nice to say that the blessing, even the ones that it seems like it wasn't a blessing, there is some blessing there. Okay. Now we get to Shimon and Levi, the next two brothers, where he's clear he's cursing something, at least, he's look at verse 7. Cursed is their rage, for it is intense. And again, he says they stole their weaponry is a stolen craft. We talked about this. The Jew, even when he has to go fight, it's stolen, meaning it's not naturally his quality. The quality of warfare is the quality of Jacob. I'm sorry, the quality of Esav, because that's what Isaac tells. That's what Isaac tells Esav. Welcome, Andy. He says, "Achar b'chaticha, you live on your sword." So he says, you went and you killed the city, the Shechem, the people of Shechem. You stole that craft from Esav. By the way, part of the rebuke there are theories that say that King David is sort of the combination of Isaac and Jacob together. If you think about it, not Isaac, Esav and Jacob. Yeah, Esau and Jacob together, the twins. In other words, the rectified Esav. And the reason why you would say that, first of all, he was a warrior. He was also red. He was also hairy. Everything we know about Esav. Yes. Yeah, yes. I'm pretty sure he was, well, he right as it said that he had hair. Certainly red. Let me go back to that. Certainly red. So he's a warrior. But again, that's why the brothers, one of the reasons why the brothers nobody thought he would be the king is because at least in that culture, that wasn't seen as a sign of beauty or dignity at that point. So they didn't respect him also because of the way he looked, not only, but also. So in a way, Esav, King David, of course, also has the sword, and you have to go to war. But the question is, when you go to war, is that your natural? Is that your natural state, or is that the exception, an anomaly, and something that is a necessary evil, but is not something that you celebrate? And so we see that King David, of course, his wars were classified as wars of a mitzvah, but Hashem says that he won't. Hashem says through the prophet that he won't build the temple. Only his son Solomon will build the temple because he was a man of war. Now, of course, the wars that he did were wars of mitzvah. So what's wrong? He did a mitzvah, right? But unlike in other cultures where we celebrated the warrior, here we say it's not what we are. We need it. We do it. Hopefully we're good at it. At least King David was good at it. We should be good at it. But it's not stolen craft. In other words, that's not our ideal. It's not our ideal of what we want to, what we celebrate, as opposed to ancient cultures where they're going to put statues of warriors. We're not going to do that. Okay, so that's just a little bit about that. The bottom line is, he says, we talked about this as well. He mentions two things. He says, "Ba'apam hargu ish," with their wrath, for their rage they murdered people, or a man, which could be plural, so people, and at their whim they hamstrung an ox. And we talked about this. He's probably alluding to, at least Rashi, according to Rashi, he's alluding to the sale of Joseph and the killing of the people of Shechem. Now, we did mention this last week again, 2 weeks ago. I'll say it again very quickly. The killing of the people of Shechem, at least from the perspective of the brothers, was justified. And it's hard to know if they're right or wrong. Torah doesn't give a clear response. Maimonides, for example, says that they were right. Because what about the innocent people of Shechem? So Maimonides, there are different interpretations. Some people say, well, the innocent people of Shechem are protecting Shechem and therefore not allowing them to release the abducted Dinah. But Maimonides says even more. He says one of the 7 Noahide laws is to set up courts of justice. So if you're part of a society that has no justice, then you're culpable. That's Maimonides says. In any case, what I'm saying over here is that if it's true that when it says with their wrath, that with their whim they hamstrung an ox, refers to Joseph, to the sale of Joseph, because we mentioned this last time that Joseph, the Torah refers to Moses when he in his blessings refers to Joseph as an ox. So if that's the case, then what turns out what Jacob is saying as follows: now that they sold Joseph, and that shows, and there's no justification for that, of course. So that shows that when they killed the people of Shechem, it wasn't only because they were seeking justice, but it's also an expression of their negative character, right? And the proof is because they had that cruelty also when it was not called for. So if you're only going to express that cruelty when necessary, okay, so you could say you're doing the right thing. But the fact that they went and they killed the people and they sell Joseph, so now you go back and say, oh, so now we're going to open up and revisit and say, was the killing of the people of Shechem only because you thought it was the right thing to do, or was it also a result of wrath and negative and anger? So that's what we did last week, 2 weeks ago. Okay, now we're caught up. Now we're all caught up. So he has verse 7, which verse 7 is very harsh. We're going to try to sweeten it a little bit. Verse 7, accursed is their rage, for it is intense, and their wrath, for it is harsh. I will separate them within Jacob, and I will disperse them in Israel. What does that mean? So the first thing, it says that we're going to be scattered around. Where are they going to be scattered around? So the Levites are obviously going to be scattered because the Levites did not have a portion of the land of Israel. So they weren't living in one place. And for them to sustain themselves, they would have to go and collect the tithings. So they're obviously going all over Israel to all the agricultural areas to be able to collect, to ask people to give them the tithings. So in that sense, they're dispersed. So that's like a curse. That's like a result of, that's what Jacob is referring to. The question is Shimon. Where is Shimon dispersed? So that's a question. So Rashi says like this. Rashi says the poor people, the Sophrim, the scribes, and the school teachers came from the tribe of Shimon. In other words, these are all professions where you would have to go. In agricultural society, everyone's everyone is on their land. But the people are not on their land, other people are not in agriculture. So if your profession is a teacher, you have to go around the circuit to the students to teach them. So that's all over Israel. And also the scribe, you needed scribes. So the scribe is not living in one place. They're going to where the customers need them. So that's how the Rashi, following the Medrash, explains verse 7 to explain how it's not just a curse, but it's also almost like a prophecy of what's going to happen in the future. And of course, it's clear that with Levi did not get a portion of the land, so he is scattered, and Shimon, according to Rashi, is also scattered. Okay, all good. Now the question is, what do we do with this verse? So this is a beautiful verse. The commentaries, the commentaries and the Hasidic commentaries sweeten this verse. Number one, we start with Rashi. Rashi says, Arur apam, which is accursed is their rage. Says Rashi, very beautiful Rashi. Rashi says, even when they do something wrong, God doesn't curse them, God curses their rage. Or Jacob doesn't curse them, he curses their rage, which is interesting, right? It's not that they are cursed, it's their rage is cursed, separating the character trait from the person. You're not saying you are an angry person, cursed is your rage. You say, no, it's your rage, it's not you. And Rashi continues and says that this is what Bilam says. When Bilam came to curse the Jews and end up blessing the Jews, he says, Bilam says, Ma ekob lo kaboel, how can I curse if God didn't curse? Meaning to say that they're not cursed, but they are cursed. Aren't they cursed in this verse? No, it's not them, it's their wrath. Right? So this is important in all areas. When you look at somebody, look at the negativity within somebody, even if you have to identify it and call it out and say this is bad behavior, it's just that it's behavior. It's an external to their core character. It's not themselves. And that's what you get from the words. Cursed is their wrath, as opposed to cursed are they. So that's one point. Now we get to the very nice point. I will scatter them amongst Israel. I'm divided. I will divide them and scatter them amongst divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. The Hasidic commentaries say as follows: this wrath, which is sort of the zealotry, the idea that they felt that there's injustice and they had to stand up to it, is a negative according to Jacob. In small measures, it's positive, and everybody needs some of it. So when he says, I will scatter them in Israel, amongst Israel and Jacob, what he's saying is not just technically the Levites will be spread around, but the quality of the Levites, this quality of wrath and rage in small measure is necessary for everybody. And that's a positive. It's not too intense and doesn't get out of hand. So break it apart and spread it out throughout Israel. It's not just the Levites, but it's and the Shimonites, but also the quality that Jacob is cursing. He's only cursing it because it's too intense and too concentrated. But in a smaller measure, it's actually necessary. People to be outraged at negativity and not sleep at night and try to do something to fix it. That is a positive, and that is something that everybody needs some of. And that's achalkim, scatter them. So now when you read verse 7, in light of the Hasidic commentaries, it's not a curse, it's the opposite. It's saying that it's actually a positive quality. You just have to manage it correct, and you have to actually disperse it, and everybody should get a little piece of it. So that's, I think, a creative and a positive way of reading this verse, but it's also practical because some rage is necessary and a positive, and if you don't have it, then you may not survive as a people. Not too radical, right?
No, it's a good interpretation.
Okay, good.
Because Levi is ultimately the highest tribe.
In a way, yes.
Because Moshe comes from.
Yeah, so it's interesting that Jacob's blessing, Levi doesn't get any blessed, but Moshe, who almost always, when Moshe blesses the people before he dies, he sort of tries to continue the themes of Jacob. That's what he does. In fact, the verse, the Zot HaBracha, the portion, this is the blessing that Moshe blessed. So the first verse says, Ish asher kibirchato berachatam. Each one according to his blessing, he blessed them. What does that mean? Obviously, he blessed them according to the blessing. So one interpretation is that he blessed them according to the blessing that their father Jacob blessed them. So it's an elaboration, an expansion over the blessings of Jacob when Moshe does it at the end of the Torah. But one big difference is Levi. Levi is not blessed. In Moshe's blessings, Levi gets the biggest blessing. Levi and Joseph. Joseph gets a big blessing, but Jacob too. But Levi gets the big blessing. But also, it's interesting, one of the things he says, he praises them in a way that of their harshness, that they went to war. He doesn't say it in these words exactly, but according to Rashi, he's saying that in the time of the Egel, of the golden calf, the Levites were loyal to Hashem, and they went to fight the sinners, and they also killed their own relatives. Now I'm like, whoa, that's not why. Why is that a good thing? But you see here that it seems like what Jacob, the quality of the harshness and the stubbornness and sticking to your principles in the long run, from Moshe's perspective, actually led to their greatness, because they got their greatness because of their response, because of their not willing to sin. So that's
the way
stubbornness.
Isn't that the way also we understand that modern Hebrew, probably ancient Hebrew, the word Norah?
Nora,
It's a good-
awesome, right?
Like it's a nightmare, but it's also an awesome.
Right,
thing.
awesome. Yeah, Nora is
But
awesome.
In modern Hebrew, you say it like it's a nightmare. It's a Norah.
Yeah, you say terrible. You could say it's terrible, but terrible. But yeah, interesting. Yeah. In biblical Hebrew, it's less negative, but it's still just as frightening. But again, frightening could be from something awesome or something terrible. But
Awesome or
awesome,
awful.
awesome or awful. That's good. Yeah, that's good.
But now that I think of it, I never thought of this before. The fact that Moshe comes from the tribe of Levi,
Yeah.
not from the tribe of Judah,
Right.
is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and that's why Moshe is not even, maybe he himself was somewhat of a political leader, but that's not his main role. We refer to Moshe today. The Gemara says Moshe had the qualities and in some ways halacha classification of a king. But we don't see Moshe HaMelech. We say David HaMelech, David HaMelech. Right? Moshe is, what do you say Moshe in Jewish culture?
Okay.
Rabbeinu. Well, he happens to be the greatest prophet, but even that is not how we define the Torah. The Torah says he's the greatest prophet. The Torah classifies him as the greatest prophet, but Jewish culture or Jewish literature, we say Rabbeinu, he's our teacher. So Moshe's quality is the Torah that he taught. That's his most important quality, at least what's relevant to us. For David, also taught Torah perhaps, but he's the epitome. He's the epitome of the epitome of leadership. So Moshe himself. So you have a separation of powers. You have different. We know Joseph is. We know Reuven is not the leader, but who is the leader? So then you have it. Then it breaks up. You have the political leader as David, but then you can have other forms of leadership.
Yeah, but Moses confronts Pharaoh. That's a political.
That's a political move. So Moshe himself, we consider Moshe himself a political leader. There's no question. The Gemara says he's a melech. He's considered a king. But Moshe had many qualities. But what endured? What? In other words, Moshe. How do I say this? I'm not sure myself. But the point here is, when somebody has all those qualities, it happened to be he had to fulfill multiple roles. But his descendants, for example, okay, his descendants weren't leaders anyway. Ultimately, the judgment of Jewish history is that he's a teacher, and maybe you could say that a teacher would mean that his political achievements were also by education, right? So it's Moshe, right? Think about this for a second. What does it mean Moshe got the people out of Egypt, right? So it's not just he forced them out. He taught the concepts of belief in Hashem. Everyone's equal before Hashem, which means, which is obviously inconsistent with the concept of slavery. You have to go out, you have to serve Hashem in the desert, you have to bring the law. Moshe is the lawgiver, right? So sometimes you could be a political leader because there's a vacuum or because you're the best person for the job. But what's your style of leadership? So he is the teacher. He's the ultimate teacher in a way, even though he was the greatest prophet too, right? But what do we have for Moshe, right? In other words, yeah, it's an interesting concept, but the bottom line is it's clear that there's going to be a separation, and Judah is not. Judah's the political leader. Moshe, when he talks about the Levites, and this is another interesting point, because the Levites are serving the temple, but Moshe, when he talks about the Levites in his blessings, he says, Israel, they will teach your Torah to Jacob. They'll teach your ordinances to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. In other words, the Levites, even though anyone could be a master of the Torah, anyone could be a teacher of Torah, but practically speaking, the Levites were more the Torah scholars because they didn't have the agriculture to distract them, because they had no portion of the land of Israel. So what did they do all day? So the priests worked in the temple. What did the Levites do? right? They only support the work in the temple. And there's so many Levites. Ratio of Levites is a 13th of the Jewish people. The priests is literally one family. Jacob and Aaron and 4 sons. When Moshe's generation, there's 5, 6, 7, 8 priests. How many priests could there be already? There were when Moshe passes away. There's 2 of the sons died. There's 3 priests. There's Pinchas is 4 priests. Maybe they had some children. That's about it, right? But here you have a whole tribe of people that were Levites. So they were separated from mundane activity. They were the scholars. So they were the teachers. So in some sense, Moshe, the teacher, and the Levi goes together hand in hand, because practically speaking, the Levites, and that's why, for example, Maimonides says that anyone could be on the Sanhedrin, but when the Torah's vision, Torah's imagination, that many of them were going to be priests, so because they had the time, priests and Levites, and therefore, when the Torah talks about the laws of the Supreme Court in Deuteronomy, it does say you're going to go and speak to the Kohen, the Levi, the Levite, the Kohen, because practically speaking, there's going to be more Levites and Kohanim on the Supreme Court, because they I want to say it this way, they have nothing else to do, but they don't have a portion in the land of Israel, so they're not working in the fields, so they have time to dedicate.
So the Levites are teachers, and Shimon is the school teacher.
Yeah, Melande Tinokot. Yeah, there's difference between teaching young children to read and write. So that's more like you don't have to be a scholar for that, right? That's not you don't have to be a right. Look, I'm just quoting the verse. I'm sorry. So it says, if in that, this is in the portion of Shoftim, which describes amongst other things, and that Shoftim means judges. So it talks about the judiciary. If a matter of judgment is hidden from you between blood and blood, between verdict and verdict, between plague and plague, matters of dispute in your cities. So the beginning of the parsha says, make a court in every city. But what happens if the judges in this city don't know the law? So what do? So you go to the Supreme Court. You shall rise up and ascend to the place that Hashem your God shall choose. Supreme Court. Here's how he describes the court. You shall come to the Kohanim, the Levites, and to the judge who will be in those days. We need to say, it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a Kohen. It could be a Kohen, Levite, or a judge, because Israelites are also on the Supreme Court. But generally speaking, there happen to be probably a disproportionate amount of priests and Levites on the court because of the scholarship. And that's what Moshe, going back to Moshe, says, they're going to teach the Torah to the people. And that's why Moshe, he's a Levite, but he's also a teacher. That's how we got to this.
10 Commandments. Last night.
10 Commandments? Oh, I'm sorry.
They were on TV.
Oh, okay. The lawgiver. Okay.
So the Lubavitch Rebbe also fits into this because he's a political leader and a teacher.
So
you say Rabbeinu?
Well, a Rebbe is a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Rebbe is a teacher. That's the core. Rabbi is also a teacher, which is interesting because you talk about other faiths. I would imagine that the vision of a priest, for example, or is more of a spiritual. He can do something that the common person can't do, or whatever. So has some sort of spiritual role or religious role. But in Judaism, the rabbi is just a teacher, maybe determine the law, maybe a judge, but maybe a teacher. But there's no supernatural spiritual powers that the spiritual leader has that the common person doesn't have. In fact, what is very interesting, because every time I say it, some people didn't know it, so it's interesting. Maybe everybody knows it. Is that at a Jewish wedding, you don't need a rabbi. Jewish wedding, you don't need a rabbi. What you need is you need a bride, you need a groom. You need 2 witnesses. That's all you need. And the 2 witnesses have to see how the groom betroths the bride. He gives her a ring or gives her something of value. That's all. They don't need a rabbi. You also need, if you want a minyan, if you want to say the Shara Brachot, fine, but you don't need that. The marriage is valid with 2 witnesses to common people. You don't need any spiritual component to put in the holy waters, right? The point here is, so what is the rabbi? The rabbi is here to entertain people, but really maybe to make sure that that they did it the right way, right? But it's not the idea that the rabbi somehow is more spiritual and can achieve something that the common person cannot achieve. The rabbi is a teacher, and that comes all the way down from Moshe Rabbeinu. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for starting the discussion about the qualities of the leader. That leader is a teacher, first of all, and separation of the teacher of adults versus teacher of children. Because being a teacher of adults, you have to have like an influence and skills. Is that reflected in the blessings anywhere, or how would you say about what would you say about the influence and skills of a leader, like Moshe or even David?
Yeah, that's something to think about. I just want to say that I'm not here to put down the school children. In fact, it's known that the Baal Shem Tov, before he became the Baal Shem Tov and before he started revealing his Torah, he was a assistant school teacher, right? So there's no question. You say influence, maybe teaching children, you need to have greater influence because the adults, they don't have energy to run around and play in the sandbox.
Well,
No offense.
even talking about the children, it's easier to influence small children than it is the adult children, right?
I have to think about it. In a way, yes. But maybe no. Yeah. In other words, there's a school. When I say teacher, there's a school child. Is you're teaching skills, but then the idea of what Moshe says, Yoru mishpatecha, teach the laws. It's not just teaching. It's more like almost like also the function of the judge of this court is determine the law. So I call that teacher, but that's to teach the law means you have to know the law and determine the law. So that's much more a question of scholarship, even more than influence, right? Because the job of the teacher in this context, or the member of the court, is to determine how to apply the law to this given situation, right? So that is scholarship.
I was talking more about Moshe because Moshe
right.
had.
Yeah. So Moshe's style of leadership is interesting because was Moshe a success or a failure as a leader? In other words, if you ask him, in many ways, he felt that he was not successful. And that explains why in the book of Deuteronomy, he becomes so upset at certain junctions. Like, for example, when the people ask for meat and Moshe cannot handle it. And he says, take my soul away from him, I want to die, because he's like, I'm trying to give the people a sense of spirituality. And it turns out that they want meat. Excuse me. So they're not taking any of this to heart. And on the other hand, there are indications that the people are affected by Moshe. And it takes time. And the Talmud says it takes 40 years until the student could really fully internalize the teachings of the teacher. So I think Moshe was too harsh in his self-judgment about how effective he was as a teacher. I think generally teachers don't realize always how effective they are or the areas in which they are effective. It's much easier to see and say the people don't know what he's listening, etc. But I don't think that that's the full story. I think that in many ways, we're planting seeds and affecting people. And if we don't see it now, it's planted and it will sprout. That's what I think.
Thank you. But in the blessing for the Levi, it wasn't reflected in the blessing. Not now, or maybe on the
Here
Moshe
certainly
blessing.
now. He does say I will spread Achalka and B'Yaakov, will spread that quality amongst the Jewish people, that strength and that in a way stubbornness and the wrath that will fuel the fighting for what you believe. So that becomes something that all the Jewish people have if we're to survive. In Moshe's blessing, he doesn't talk about it too much, so I don't know. I'm sure everything is in the Torah, everything is in the blessings. So I'm sure you can glean a lot about the influence.
But even in what you just mentioned, the desire to kind of pursue justice.
Yeah.
It's also like the desire to influence. Maybe that's what it is.
Right. And in Judaism, it's also the obligation, and we take it for granted. But the fact that Moshe says, teach the Torah to your children, shinatam levanecha, to your children. Sages say it's not just children, it's not just biological children, but it's also your students. The idea that everybody, the masses, are supposed to know the law, supposed to know the Torah. That's just a complete anomaly to the ancient world, and certainly the areas where they were in, where the upper classes of society have the knowledge and they keep everybody else in the dark. So part of Moshe's idea as a teacher is that everybody is supposed to know the law. Everybody is supposed to have access to the knowledge. And that's embedded within Judaism. And that's why the first free public school system that I know of is in the times of the Mishnah in Israel, right? The concept that the community has the obligation to teach the law to everybody. Or the way Jonathan Sachs always quotes the verse from portion of Yisrael, you'll be a nation of priests, right? In other words, everybody is the priest. So the priest in those days was the priest, the person who had the knowledge and the way to connect to God, etc. But now everybody is a priest at Sinai, and God speaks to everybody. He doesn't speak to Moses, speaks to everybody. So Moshe as teacher, and Judaism as the idea, the wisdom accessible to all. That's embedded very deep within our culture, I think.
The concept of Levi especially in the book of Bereshit, in this sentence, is this a metaphor for the Jewish people among the nations?
Interesting. If you're going to say that we're a kingdom of priests, then in some ways we're the Levi for the rest of the world. Now, what does that mean? People look at that statement and say the Jewish people, the chosen people, whatever, as a way of saying we're different, we're better, etc. But just like the priest is, first of all, serving everybody else. And in some ways, their job with the priest is successful when he influences the rest of the people. And the same is with the Jewish people. When you say the Jewish people have a mission, what is that mission? It's not just that the Jewish people are connected to God, but ultimately, like the prophets elaborate upon this at great length, that everybody knows Hashem. So in some ways, we're like, yeah, in some ways, I think that would make sense. Yep. Okay, 10:07. We can go to Judah. Been waiting for Judah for the past couple of weeks. So there's a very beautiful Rashi here that says, really, we should open up all the Rashis here because they're all beautiful and they're all poetic, and there are a lot of Rashis here. But I remember this from the third grade, where Rashi says Judah starts running away. Because Judah, if you want to rebuke Judah, there is a lot to rebuke. There's all kinds of stories. So Judah, according to Rashi, once Judah sees that Jacob, his father, was rebuking the older ones, so he starts sort of going back. And then in the bracket, which may mean that it's not from Rashi, maybe from versions of Rashi, I don't know, he says, so he shouldn't rebuke him for the story of Tamar. Okay. And then Jacob calls him and he says, Yehuda, he says, you're different, you're going to get the blessing. Okay, fine. So what does he say to Judah? So to Judah, he says as follows: Judah, you, your brothers shall acknowledge. Ata yeducha achecha. Your brothers should acknowledge. Your hands will be at your enemy's nape. Your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. So obviously, we're already talking about his military might. Well, we could read the whole thing. Let's read the whole blessing to Judah, and then we'll come back and break it down. So verse 9, a lion cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you elevated yourself. He crouches, lies down like a lion, and like an awesome lion who dares rouse him. So he's a gur, he's a young lion, and then he's an aryeh. He's a full-grown lion. So there's two steps. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh shall arrive, and his will be an assemblage of nations. So that refers. Okay, I'm just going to read everything. Then we'll go back to the Rashis. Then we'll go another layer of commentary. He will tie his donkey to the vine, to the vine branch. His donkeys fall. Is that a word? F-O-A-L. Fall. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes. red eyes from wine, and white tooth from milk. That's the Rashi. What do you do with this poetry? When you open Rashi, what do you mean? What do you do? You do what everybody does. Beautiful, beautiful blessings. We'll see the Rashis. I'm just going to open it here so I have an easier job. 49. Okay, I have the Rashis here. I'm going to read some Rashis, and like I said, then we'll come back and do another layer of commentary. But Rashis here are beautiful and poetic, enough to start today. Here he goes. Okay, first thing is he says, Gur Aryeh. So he's talking about David. He goes leadership when he talks about. So Rashi already says in verse 8, your hands will be at the nape of your enemies. So Judah is fighting with the enemies. When is Judah fighting with the enemies? The first one, the Senate of Judah fights the enemies, of course, is King David. So that's what Rashi says. In the time of David and of my enemies, you have given me the back of their necks. That's King David speaking, praising God in the book of Samuel, right? So he uses that same description that Jacob uses. Okay, so now we're talking about the son. We're ready to turn to David. So now he says like this, he says a cub, a grown lion is Judah. Gur, Aryeh. Gur is a cub and Aryeh is a lion. What does that mean? So Rashi says, if you look at the story and the biography of King David, first he's a cub, then he's a lion. What does that mean? Says Rashi, he prophesied about David, who was at first like a cub. When Saul was king over us, it was you who led Israel out through and brought them in. Book of Samuel, again a quote, meaning King Saul was the leader, was the king, and Jacob was a cub, a small leader. He was a general, a successful warrior, but he was still didn't grow to full strength of the lion. And at the end, a lion, when they made him king over them. This is what Onkelos means in his translation, he will be a ruler in his beginning, meaning he starts out as a small leader, and then he becomes a lion. So under King Solomon, he was already had a certain degree of strength and leadership, and then he becomes the king. There's another medrash that says that first he was the king only over his tribe. If you look at the story, after Saul died, so the Jewish people made Saul's son the king, but Judah made David the king over just his tribe. And then afterward, he became the king of all of Israel. So first he was just the king of his tribe in Hebron, and then he moved to Jerusalem and became the king of the people. So that's the stages of King David's growth. First Gur, then Aryeh, first cub, then lion. Okay. Next. Then we continue and we say, Miteref ne Alita, he says, from the prey, my son, you withdrew. You went up. You went up from the prey. What does that mean? So it seems like in the metaphor, I guess the lion takes prey, but what does it mean you got up? So the simple meaning means he prays and then he eats it and then he leaves, maybe. But Rashi has a different interpretation. Rashi says that Miteref, the prey, is a play on the verses that when they brought the tunic, Joseph's tunic to Jacob, he says, Tarof Taraf Yosef. Joseph was devoured.
Joseph was the what?
Devoured like by an animal. So he thinks Joseph was devoured by an animal. So here Rashi is saying that Miteref, from the prey, from the devouring, you elevated yourself. Meaning, I thought you were involved in the preying of Joseph, in preying on Joseph. Now I know that you elevated yourself because, in fact, Judah was instrumental in some ways in saving Joseph by saying, what's the point of killing him? Let's sell him. So obviously you can look at that as negative and positive. He sold his brother, but you can also look at it, he saved him from death. So it all depends how you want to read it. But that's how Rashi's reading it. So if you look at Rashi, for example, my son, you withdrew, Hebrew Alita, you withdrew yourself and said, what? Okay, let's go back. From what I suspected you, from the prey, from what I suspected you, namely that Joseph had surely been torn up, that's the quote. A wild beast has devoured him, Tarof, Taraf Yosef, same word, Tarof. By the way, the word that you hear, something is kosher or treif. Treif is devoured. Devoured means the animal was killed by an animal and not by the ritual slaughter.
Interesting.
That's what it comes from. And so when you say this candy is treif, it doesn't make any sense. This candy was devoured. Doesn't mean anything. But it means it's not kosher. Kosher, by the way, means prepared. That's really what kosher means. It's prepared. No. Kasher means it's like prepared. It's like fit for. So it's fit for something, for eating, for consumption, right? Or prepared or said designated for consumption. So if it's kosher, if you can eat, if it's fit for consumption, then it's kosher. So kosher then becomes anything that's good. But the same thing is with treif. Treif means that it was taref, it was tarof, it was devoured. And referring back to the animal, because the animal has to be slaughtered properly, and the opposite of the slaughter would be the devour. In any case, so he says, the verse says, I suspected you from, so the word from mitera, from the prey, from what I suspected you, namely that Joseph has surely been torn up. Oh, then it continues. A wild beast devoured him. That's what Jacob says, who's a wild beast. So the Medrash says this refers to Judah, who was likened to a lion. So in other words, we're rereading those verses, and when Jacob says Joseph was devoured, a wild beast devoured him, he could be saying Joseph was devoured by his brother Judah. And now we're saying that's what I thought, I suspected. Now you raise yourself from that. And Rashi says you withdrew yourself and said, what is the gain if we slay our brother to cover up his blood? Similarly, Judah withdrew from killing Tamar when he confessed, she is right, it is from me. So these are two stories two stories where Judah sort of steps away from the culpability of killing somebody, right? Because he also saves Tamar. Tamar was supposed to be killed. In any case, therefore, it says, he crouches rested like a lion, and like a lion who will rouse him. What does it mean to crouch rest like a lion? It means he's living in peace. Now, David himself is not in peace, he's fighting. So Rashi therefore says, this refers to David's son. Therefore, he crouched, laid down, etc. This was fulfilled in the time of Solomon, where every man under his vine, etc. The description in the book of Kings about the days of King Solomon is each tachat gafno v'tachat teinato, each person under his vine and under his victory. So if you're sitting under your vine and victory, that's the verse. That's the description of peace, as opposed to when you have to mobilize for war. Right, so sitting under your vine is like the symbol of peace. If you're planting broccoli, you have no other worry. If you're picking up lemons, there's no other worries. That's a good thing. So that
sentence shows up all the time in the play Hamilton.
Oh, it does?
George
Okay.
Washington
I did not know. Okay.
inspires.
Yeah,
just
but that's a direct quote from Kings, from the book of Kings, from Days of Solomon.
That's what
Yeah.
George Washington wants.
I didn't know that.
Revolutionary.
Thank you. That's amazing. That's great. That's great.
They were very biblical back then.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. We still have to do all the Davids, then go back and do the additional interpretation. But Rashi himself is beautiful. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. What does that mean? So basically, there's always going to be a king from Judah. Now the question is, what is always? After the destruction of the temple, there are no more kings. Really, even the first temple, the second temple, even in the second temple, when there were kings with Hashmonaim, they were priests. So King David, the kings from King David only lasted throughout the first temple. And even in the first temple, there was a split. They only ruled over the two tribes over the southern Israel, over Judah and Benjamin. So what does it mean? That they will never depart from Judah. The scepter shall never depart from Judah.
But you just said Moshe was the king, in a way. So he has the scepter,
Yeah.
in a way.
And Moshe, but not Judah. Moshe is not from Judah.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying, but it
yeah.
says,
So it's from when David is chosen. There was also Solomon. There was also Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. But it means from when Judah. These verses, according to Rashi, are talking about David. So once the dynasty of David is established, the kingship will not move to other tribes. Now, so there's two problems. First of all, it did. In the days of Solomon's son, the kingdom split. So the commentaries explain what that means is there could be kings from other tribes, but there won't be a dynasty. Ultimately, it comes back to David. That's one point. Another point is so we have the problem that says scepter shall not depart from Judah, but scepter leadership has departed from Judah. So Rashi says no. Rashi says let's read Rashi. From David and thereafter, these who bear the scepter after the termination of the kingdom are the exile arches, the princes in Babylon, who ruled over the people with a scepter and who were appointed by royal mandate. That's from the Talmud. In other words, in Babylonia, even when the kingdom split, kingdom was ended, so the Jews don't have any kings anymore. So it doesn't say the kingship will not depart from Judah. It says scepter. Scepter means is a stick that represents leadership. So the Talmud says in Babylonia, when the king appointed, the Gentile kings appointed leaders over the Jews, they were called exile arches. They were also from the tribe of Judah. So it happens to be whatever form of leadership we were in, for the most part, Judah, they came from the tribe of Judah. And then he continues, Umechokek, nor the student of the law from between his feet. Umechokek is really in modern Hebrew, mechokek is someone who makes the law. So member of parliament is a mechokek because he makes the law. But in any case, so it's the students, these are the princes of the land of Israel. So the sages in the land of Israel, the leaders of the Sanhedrin, Gamliel, Hillel, all these people were from the tribe of Judah. So Judah also has some form of Torah leadership. Interesting. Until Ad Ki Yavo Shiloh, till Shiloh comes. Who's Shiloh? So Rashi says it's Mashiach, it's the Messiah. How do you get to the word Shiloh? To whom the kingdom belongs. Shiloh, he says it's a play. Shiloh, Shelo, it belongs to him. Kingship belongs to him. And that's how, also he says that's how Onkelos renders it, okay? According to the Medrash Haggadah, the word Shiloh is not Shelo, it belongs to him, but Shiloh. Shai is a gift to him. As it is said in the book of Psalms, they will bring a gift to him who is to be feared, meaning referring to Mashiach, that the nations of the world will bring gifts to the leader of the Jews in the Messianic era. So Shiloh is either the king whose kingship belongs to him, Messiah, or the Messiah whom everybody will bring gifts to. And then it continues, and to him will be gathering of peoples, meaning in time of Mashiach, everybody will gather to serve God in the land of Israel. Okay, we could stop here. We can continue because I do want to say some additional commentary, not just Rashi. But maybe we have another. Okay, from here, the next two verses talks about the great agriculture in the land of Judah, which you have till today. You can go to the store anywhere in Greenwich or Port Chester and buy wine from the Judean mountains. That's what we're referring to. He binds his donkey to a vine, and to a tendril, he binds his young donkey, which means the vine, which is obviously not very strong, is strong enough to hold the donkey. So that represents, it's a metaphor for the strength of the vine, the wine production in the lands of Judah. So it says Rashi, he prophesies concerning the land of Judah, namely that wine will flow like a fountain from it. One Judite man will bind one foal, donkey, to a vine and load it from one vine. So one vine is already enough to load up a full donkey. That's how we're reading these verses. And from one tendril, he will load a young donkey from Genesis Rabbah. Okay. He will launder his garments with wine. Not recommended, but if you want to launder your garments with wine, says Rashi, all this is an expression of an abundance of wine. Okay. Skipping a little bit to the next one. Red-eyed from wine, an expression of redness, as Targum renders, okay. Let's skip that. And of course, from milk, due to the abundance of milk, for his Judah's land, there will be good pasture for flocks of sheep. This is the meaning of the verse. He shall be red-eyed from an abundance of wine, and he shall be white-toothed from an abundance of milk. Beautiful, beautiful. According to the Targum, however, Einaim, eyes, doesn't mean red eyes. It means that it denotes mountains, because from there one can see far away. This is very beautiful, right? So when he says the eyes, his eyes are red from wine, you can read it that the people had so much wine to drink, their eyes turned red. Or you could say eyes means the mountains. And eyes represent mountains because you could see from there. There's a very famous statement that there was by an Israeli soldier, anonymous. No one knows who he is, but it made headlines all over Israel. Everybody knows that when they captured the Mount Hermon in the 67 war, he said, this is the Einaim Shel Hamdina. These are the eyes of the country, because you could literally see into Damascus and you could see all of Israel. So he said that statement. So that's really from Rashi. I never realized that. Rashi says eyes are mountains. Okay, so that's it. So what do we hear so far? Leadership comes from David. Kingship, so David will be the king. Then you have the scepter, which is even when there's no kingship. He'll be the leaders in Babylonia. And then it shifts to talk about the abundance of wine and milk. Milk means there's pasture. So if there's pasture, there's milk. Even today, you drive to Hebron, you see all the Arab kids pasturing with all the sheep. And there's pasture going on over there in the mountains of Judea. So that's the blessing of Yehuda, of Judah, according to the Pshat, the simple interpretation of the poetry based on Rashi. Now we're going to add just a little bit to make it more exciting. Otherwise, you could read it at home. What do you have to come here for? Okay, one very interesting thing is Yehuda. So let's start from the beginning. Let's go back to verse 8. Judah, you your brother shall acknowledge. Yehuda ata yaducha achecha. You your brother should acknowledge. It's not clear what that means. It means probably that they'll acknowledge you as the leader. Your brothers will accept you as the leader. So that is very interesting. The reason why this is interesting is because this is from the Abarbanel. This is beautiful. It's not a technicality. He's not saying, oh, happens to be your brothers are going to choose you as a leader. Your brothers will acknowledge that you're the leader. According to the Abarbanel, this is the reason why you're the leader. Because your brothers agreed to your leadership. And they were not jealous by your leadership. Contrast to who? To Joseph. Joseph was the leader. In other words, the father wanted him to be the leader. But for whatever reason, Joseph's leadership did not encourage the brothers to accept it, but it encouraged jealousy. What does that tell you? That itself is the proof that he's not the best leader. In other words, because he creates that jealousy. In other words, that creates the brother. If it creates jealousy, it means you're doing it wrong. A good leader is one who can get the brothers to accept him. So that's a beautiful concept. It's a concept that this is the test. The fact that everybody accepted him is the testament of that he is the proper leader. So it's very democratic. You're not the leader because you're the greatest king and you're able to superimpose your will on the people. You're the leader because the people accept you. And therefore, yes, you want Joseph to. Father Jacob would love. If you ask the father, and this is Jacob speaking. If you ask Jacob, who would he want to be the leader? He would say, I want Joseph to be the leader. And in some ways, Joseph was the quintessential leader. He led Egypt. Listen to a little bit of the funeral of Joe Lieberman, and everybody was comparing him to Joseph the Righteous, the biblical Joseph. Yeah, last night I listened a few minutes. It's all online. But so Joseph is the epitome of the leader, but and epitome of leadership, and certainly Jacob wanted that to be. But now Jacob on his deathbed understands you can't be the leader if you create jealousy. Doesn't matter whose fault it is; it's not working. Right? He says, Yehuda, your brothers acknowledge. You're the leader. So I thought that was beautiful. Another point is that this is more of a Hasidic play. And this ties into the concept that we're all called Jews. Why are we called Jews? We're not all from the tribe of Judea. So in some ways, and I'll elaborate upon this next week because I'm going to be drowned out, the quality of Judah, all the Jewish people possess. Ata yoducha achecha. Yoducha is a play on Judah. And Judah means acknowledgement. Judah means acknowledgement. Your brothers will acknowledge you, meaning your brothers have this quality of acknowledgement from you. So something about Judah, the quality of Judah applies to all the Jews, which is why we're called Jews. Now, you want to hear what that is? You got to come back next week, God willing, in good health. So it was a cliffhanger because there's too much noise here.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot more to discuss. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't even if I got it.